Hello, my name is Vanessa Mazzucci, Director of Events here at Sweet Adelines International, and I invite you to journey with us to Northern Lights Region 6. Come along as they take us on a tour of their choruses, learn tips for better breath management and how to visualize your voice, and sing along with special past performances from Spice Quartet and City of Lakes Chorus. As we wrap up our journey to travel in tune, we want to thank everybody who has joined us along the way. Be sure to follow along via Travel in Tune webpage or the mobile app while you can. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Terry Calvert, Region 6 Education Coordinator, and I'm here with Scott Kvigne of our Region 6. He's a Master 700 Director of the City of Lakes Chorus. And Scott is here today to share his insights about two comments that often show up on our score sheets: breath management and synchronization. So Scott, I know you do a lot of coaching in Region 6 and also around the country. Can you tell us how often you encounter those two topics of breath management and synchronization when you do your coaching with different choruses or quartets?
Absolutely. Well, I think synchronization is probably one of the top 5 words that we see on our score sheets. I would bet that the vast majority of choruses and quartets, certainly that I've had experience with, have seen that on their score sheets. So if I'm previewing score sheets, I almost always see it. And very often, if I'm working with somebody outside my own chorus, they'll ask me specifically to work on synchronization. Synchronization, I think of more as a symptom than actually a core issue. So it isn't really that you can go in and say, let's fix synchronization. We actually have to look at what has caused the issues that we have in synchronization and then attack those as a specific issue. But definitely a very common thing on score sheets and something that I spend a lot of time working on, and I've tried to train my ears to hear those kinds of things with groups. As far as breath management, that may be the number one thing that singers want to work on individually or in quartets and choruses is the breath support issue. How do I get enough breath? How do I use my breath effectively? The longer I do this, the more time and focus I tend to spend on the breath piece, not just the physiology of the breath. How do we physically breathe? What technique do we use to breathe most efficiently? But also the when and where, why, how, all of those of the breath, and how do we make that a part of the music and most effectively use the breath so that we are fully fueled. The breath really is the fuel, isn't it? And if we're not using that effectively, it's really difficult to produce music at the highest level that we're capable of doing.
Well, as you talk about managing the breath and you talk about synchronization, it seems like those two are pretty closely related. Could you say more about that?
Absolutely. I think, as I said, I think of synchronization as more of a symptom. And two of the main causes of synchronization that I see are either how we treat word sounds, whether it's singable consonants or diphthongs or hard consonants, create synchronization issues. Other than that, I think it's the breath. Many of the synchronization issues that we hear are either the beginnings and ends of phrases, where we're taking the breaths and getting back in again, or as a result of people's personal breaths within phrases that cause little tiny sync issues. So to me, the breath is one thing that I would approach in trying to fix or trying to improve any synchronization issues that we might have in a group.
So really, addressing the breath issues a lot of times then fixes sync issues. Is that right?
Definitely. That's one of the ways. There are certainly a few things that cause synchronization issues, but once we shore up our breath plans and are breathing smartly so that we can consistently sing fully resonated and supported, those sync issues will be diminished for sure.
Huh. Okay. Well, as an individual singer, then, what do you see the biggest challenges that individual singers have with breath management?
Other than just the physiology of it. As I said, learning the technique of breathing, that is actually a challenge in itself. And there are lots of schools of thought as to how that happens. But other than the actual physiology of it, I really think it is training ourselves to breathe smartly and to breathe in a way that allows us to always produce the best sound that we're capable of, and to be very intentional about every breath that we take, why, where, and how we've taken all those breaths.
So I imagine you see a lot of ways that breath management or lack thereof plays out as you're coaching with different groups. Can you give us an idea of maybe what that looks like when you're working with a group and you don't hear good breath management?
There are a number of things that you can hear as a coach and even just as an audience member when there are breath management issues. Many of them are going to be common phrases that you also have seen on your score sheets. Things like energized phrase ends. We can feel that the phrases sort of drop off at the end if people haven't managed their breath so that they have enough air to get to the end of every phrase. If people aren't managing the breaths in between the director's phrases, we'll tend to hear audible breaths at times, or we have a tendency as singers, when we're out of air, to finish the word we're on. So if you have to sort of cut out in the middle of a phrase, if you're doing it as an emergency breath, you'll have a tendency to finish that word. If it ends in an S, you're going to finish that word, and all of a sudden there's a little consonant in there that doesn't belong there. So we'll hear stray consonants, I would call them, audible breaths. And again, there's a lack of energy sometimes as people are taking those emergency breaths. We lose the energy of the line. In addition to that, you lose consonant sound. If people are dropping off randomly, you tend to lose consonant sound at particular times in the phrase.
So it's like there are dips that you're hearing in the sound because these small breaths are being taken?
Exactly.
Well, we all know that there are chorus breaths that we have to take that are defined for us by our directors, and there are no breath zones where we're not supposed to breathe. But then sometimes people have a hard time following that plan. Maybe the phrase is too long. What should they do?
We want to follow the chorus breath plan, right? So that's sort of rule one. And it's important, I think, to understand that the chorus breath plan is driven by the music. At least I, as a director, when I do my breath plan for the chorus, or if I'm working with another group, I'm sort of helping them plan out their breaths, I'm looking at the music, and I need to determine where the music needs to breathe. We need breaths in songs. The audience needs breaths in songs, right? And there are places where that is appropriate and places where that is not appropriate in the music. And it isn't black and white. We can make choices, but the director or the coach is making choices based on the music. And if you're fortunate, your director is kind and also takes into account the health and well-being of his or her singers. But that is, if I'm being honest, the secondary piece of it. So when I do a breath plan, I try to take my singers' abilities into account, but there are times that the music just doesn't allow for a breath in a particular place. And I expect that my singers can't all sing an 8-bar phrase without any breath, right? So that's where a personal breath plan comes in. And it's really important that each singer plans out those spots where they're going to need to take a breath, so they know before they get into the performance where they're going to need air, where they're going to need to take that breath, and how they're going to do that in order to be most effective and contribute the most to the chorus sound.
So you're talking about each singer having a personal breath plan that they've planned in advance. Now, how does that differ from what we tend to see sometimes of people with the idea that, oh, I'll just sneak a breath here or there?
Right. Well, first of all, I should say that a sneak breath is perfectly acceptable. as long as you're sneaking and it's not sneaking up on you, because that's what tends to happen a little bit is we sing until we run out of air, and then we catch that breath, right? We do those sneak breaths as needed. Unfortunately, by the time we need air, we've already started to shut down in resonance. So we're not producing sound the best that we can. If it's not a planned thing, and I'll try to do it in the phrase and not take a breath, and you can hear when I get to the end of my phrase how I've lost resonance, haven't I? Because I waited until I needed the breath in order to take it. So if we're going to sneak a breath when we need it, the reality is by the time we need it, we've already lost resonance in our voice. We've lost strength in our voice. And I like to think of it as we are contributing to the volume, but we're not contributing to the sound of the chorus. All we're really doing is making volume. We're not fully resonated. We're not in a ringing space because we're running out of air. So as a result, we're trying to be the hero. And I understand why people want to do that. I think I'm going to make it to the end of the phrase. But what happens, as we talked about loss of energy, is the resonance tends to drop, the volume even drops, and we just don't get the same consistent sound throughout when we make those emergency breaths.
So I guess singers need to be a little more realistic about what they can and can't do when they think about making their own plan.
Yes, and I think when I do it as a singer, I try to leave sort of a 10% reserve, I suppose you'd call it, because if I can make it to the end of the phrase in rehearsal, that doesn't mean on the contest stage when I'm excited and when I'm dressed up and maybe a little uncomfortable and maybe a little bit nervous and all of that is going. I've got my choreography plan going on. That doesn't mean I'm going to make it in a high stakes situation, right? When there's a little more pressure. So I leave a little bit of reserve so that I know that I'm confident I'm going to be able to make it to the end of every one of those phrases.
That's such a good point, because I personally can think of times when I can make that phrase, and then when I'm there in a performance or whatever, all the air has gone out of the room, and now I'm looking for air, that normally I should be able to make. So that's a really good point of really kind of dialing back your expectations a little bit and thinking about what situation am I going to be in. So if I were going to put together then a personal breath plan, first of all, do I need to do it for every song?
Short answer, yes. The full answer is that in reality, we all have a breath plan. It just may not always be intentional and may not always be consistent, right? We're going to breathe. If you have an 8-measure phrase, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it every time, and you're going to breathe. But if you allow your body to just make that breath plan, then you're going to get what we talked about a little bit earlier. You're going to get those emergency breaths. And as a result, you're not producing optimum sound for as long as you could do that, right? You're losing your optimum sound for significant periods of time throughout the song. So the reality is you have a plan. It's just not a purposeful plan necessarily. So absolutely, I go into every song with a plan. It's just as important to me as my words, notes, and rhythms.
So how do you put together this plan? What's your process?
Sure. I'm a baritone, so I am very organized and linear. So everything happens in a very specific order. But just to give people a basic idea of kind of how to structure this as you're getting together, I do it on my music. I write it down so that I know I have a record of that, and I'm going to do it every time. The starting point, of course, is the chorus breath plan. I'm hoping that you all have directors and coaches, or within your quartets, have figured out your breath plan. And you work around that, right? That would consist of specific spots where we breathe And I also put in what I call NBZs, or no breath zones, where I'm asking no one in the chorus to breathe. That is sometimes an important musical or an emotional moment in the song, or it may just be a place where I know people will tend to breathe. And so I want to give them a reminder that that's not a good place to breathe. If we are carrying over a phrase end, sometimes we'll tend to breathe there. It's an obvious place to breathe. So I give them a reminder not to do that. Once we have that, then the singer just has to sit down and say which of these phrases needs a personal breath. And again, depending on the kindness level of your director, there may be a lot of those and there may not be very many of them. And it also depends on the song. If it's a song that's easy to create a breath plan for the director, you may not need a lot of them. But you're going to go through and determine this phrase needs a breath. Again, for me, taking into account that 10% reserve. If I just barely make it, I'm going to add a personal breath, right? I always take out a word or a syllable. I never clip a word. And I definitely have talked to people who said, we were just always told, just take the end of a word off, right? What tends to happen when we do that is we close the word at the wrong time. The diphthong changes at the wrong time. The ending consonant is in a strange place. And again, we go back to these little synchronization errors. So to take out a full word or syllable, although it seems like a lot, and it seems like, oh, I'm not even participating in that chord, the reality is it allows you to participate more fully in everything else that you do, because you get enough breath that you don't lose resonance. So I always take out a full syllable or word. I consider how much breath I need. Do I need a little eighth note catch? Or is this a long phrase and I need to take out a longer word? So I'm going to change where I breathe based on how much breath I need, right? Always breathe before you need it. If you wait till you need it, as we talked about before, you're going to lose resonance. You're going to lose ring in your sound. And because you're going to be on stage in a high stress atmosphere, in some cases, you're going to lose a little bit of that at times in your performance. So you leave yourself a little bit of breathing room, so to speak. So always breathe before you need it. As we talked about earlier, if you sing as long as you can until you've run out of air, you will lose resonance and you'll lose structure in your sound. So plan for that little bit of breathing room so that you don't have to worry about running out of air before the breath happens. Also consider the timing of your breath. I learned something recently, coaching with Kim Vaughn with City of Lakes, and she mentioned that when we do these breath plans, we all have a tendency to breathe at the end of a phrase. We make it almost to the end, and then we lose energy because so many people are taking their breaths. So think about breathing earlier in the phrase, even if you don't need it, so that you can cover for those people that will be breathing later on in the phrase. That's a hard thing to do, to breathe when you don't really even need breath, but realize that you're now covering for some people that will be breathing later. Something I do personally, and people think it's funny, but I'm being totally honest. If I don't like a note, that's where I breathe. If I have a hard time with a note, if it just doesn't fit in my range, if it's a strange part, if it's a strange part of my voice where I'm right between my head and chest, if it is an interval that I just don't hear very well, if it's a challenge, that's where I breathe, because I'm not going to be fully participating anyway. It's a questionable note for me. Take those notes out. Now, obviously, as a baritone, if all the baritones have the same problem on the same note, we can't all breathe on the same note. So we have to consider that. But if there are spots that you struggle on, there's no harm in taking that note out, because it's a problem note for you anyway, right? Confer with your section. As I talked about, we don't want all the baritones taking that one problem note out. So I listen around me and hear where the other baritones are breathing, and I try to sort of plan my breaths around that, right? If you get too advanced breath planning, a couple things to consider. If you're a music geek like I am, look at where you are in the chord. If you're singing a root or a fifth, you're probably more important and you maybe don't want to breathe there. As a baritone, I'm going to choose to breathe maybe on a high third or on a seventh, where I don't need to be as present. And I also look at the word itself and the words that surround it. Can I get in and out without causing any problems with word sounds, right? So there are lots of things to consider. And as you get better at it, you'll be more adept at choosing wisely exactly where you want to breathe. The final and most important thing about it is do the same thing every time, so that it's a plan. It's just part of your plan. It's like you sing the same note every time, you sing the same word every time, breathe in the same place every time, so that you can learn it and then let it go and you don't ever have to concentrate on it again.
You know, Scott, that's a great way to put together a plan, and so many things to think about when you look at where to breathe and where not to breathe. When do you start putting this plan together? I mean, if you look at the process of learning a song, do you do this early in the process, or are you into actually getting ready just before you're performing? Or, you know, where in that process do you put together this breath plan?
For me, earlier is better. When we're in the learning process of the song, the more we can learn at that point, the more will become just part of that performance. So I do tend to do it fairly early. It may depend on the song. For instance, if it's a contest ballad, you might not really have the final timing of that ballad right away. So it might be hard to really plan that until you've coached on it for a while and you have that plan. If it's an uptune, it's very likely that the rhythm and tempo is not going to change significantly. So once the director has given me the breath plan, which hopefully happens when they introduce the song and on the learning media, we would hope, I start doing that within the first 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes it takes me a while to determine, I need to know the notes to be sure that, okay, now I can make this or I can't make this, or where do I want to breathe? But within about 3 weeks of introduction, I start to put my breath plan together so that it becomes just part of the learning process of the song.
So as we're learning a new song, each singer now has a responsibility to think about breathing and really make a plan to do this and put the effort into it. What is that singer going to get out of that process?
That's a good question, because it does seem like an extra step. Now it's one more thing that I have to do and one more thing I have to remember. And that's a challenge, especially when we're learning all of this other stuff. And pretty soon the choreography is going to go in and all of that. There are several things, at least for me, I automatically feel more confident because I know what I'm doing, right? You know, this is where you're going to breathe. You don't ever have to worry about whether you're going to have enough breath to get the end of the phrase because you've done that homework. So you can let that piece go altogether. You don't have to focus on stage, am I going to make it to the end of that phrase? Because you've already done that homework, right? You are contributing more consistently to the sound of the chorus. I sing barbershop for that very reason, because I'm surrounded by voices and I feel like I'm a part of this whole. I'm a part of a whole production. And if I'm breathing smartly and I'm contributing all the time, to me, that, at least for me, that's very satisfying to sing into that sound consistently. Even if that means I may be not participating in a note here or there, I feel like there's a fuller contribution that I'm making to the chorus, right? It's easier to accomplish once you've learned it. Your life is going to be easier. You don't have to worry about that stuff, right? And finally, it aids in stamina. If you emergency breathe, what will tend to happen physiologically is you start to breathe more shallow instead of getting a full breath, and you don't get oxygenated as well. So it affects your physical and vocal stamina. So once you've planned that ahead, you actually may find that you have greater stamina to get through the song.
Those are great reasons for putting in the extra work, and certainly has a great payoff for the group if everyone participates in that way and puts in that extra work to plan the breaths. It seems like breath management might be an overlooked way to make some more extra points at contest.
Definitely. Actually, in all four categories, I think. First of all, vocal skills are judged by every judge. All four categories look at vocal skills, right? What your sound judge is going to find is more consistent resonance because you are producing at an optimum sound more often. And we've talked about sort of trailing off at the ends. You don't lose that structure. You don't lose the ringability and resonance. They're judging ring and they're judging consistent resonance. And you're going to get that to a higher degree. The music judge is looking at chord stability and clarity, among lots of other things. But if you are fully resonated and ringing, those chords are going to line up better. The chord stability is there. You're not going to have to worry about decay of sound because we're clipping phrases or anything. Our entrances and exits are stronger. Expression is kind of the mother load from a breath standpoint because the expression judge owns things like word sounds. And if you have an unlimited supply of air, you can do all of those word sounds, all of the singable consonants, all of the diphthongs that take a bit more air, a bit more breath energy. Energized phrase ends. Has anyone ever seen that phrase on their score sheet? Every time. My goal is one day to not see that on my score sheet. But again, energized phrase ends are all about having enough air to sing through the ends of the phrases. The expression judge also talks about dynamic variance. Louds and softs require greater breath support and better breath management and synchronization. The expression judge also talks about synchronization. That's sort of where a lot of this lives. Finally, visual communication. Vocal skills, of course, are higher. Your sound is more confident. You are delivering your character and your energy more consistently. And I think that confidence and pride show visually. So if you're a more confident singer, while the visual communication category is visual to a large degree, they'll hear and see a higher level, I think, of energy and of character as a result of feeling like you're always fully fueled and you're always ready to sing and you have that supply of air at all times.
Wow, Scott, thank you so much. This has been so informative, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us here in Region 6 and with all of Sweet Adelines around breath management and synchronization. And I think we're all going to think a whole lot more and work a lot more about putting together those personal breath plans because they really do pay off. So thank you so much, Scott. We really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Mary Dick, and I'm here today to talk to you about your voice. Did you know we can usually see your voice? The human voice is capable of creating a great variety of sounds, vocal sounds and colors and textures. And we use vocal exercises to help develop and expand that very variety. Now, if someone were to ask you to describe your voice, what kind of descriptive words would you use? Might you say, oh, I have a real smooth, silky voice. Oh, it's kind of raspy. I probably have a little edge to my voice. Or maybe it's a really soft voice, not very big. But what if you could actually see those possibilities as well as hear them? For example, somebody might say that you have a very big voice. Whoa, she's just got this big voice that just goes everywhere. Or they might say, I have just kind of a small voice. It's not very big. It's good, but not as big as that other person. So, might you be one of those? Or maybe they say, oh, that person has such a heavy voice. It just drops, just thud, like walking through the mud. Or maybe they say, you have a very colorful voice. All kinds of color to that voice, and it's a wonderful, colorful voice. Or they might say she has a very bright voice. Maybe it's hot pink, maybe it's bright red, maybe it's yellow. But anyway, she has, what color might yours use to describe your voice? Red, green, yellow, purple. That's just another possibility. Another problem sometimes we have is we allow the voice to let too much air escape. And she has a really breathy voice. It just kind of floats with a lot of air escaping, unfortunately. Or the voice may be described, maybe your voice lacks focus. We have to say that voice needs more focus, and it just has to get gathered together to one big dot. Another problem we have lots of times is the business of vowels. Because did you know you can see a vowel? Because you can see a wide E that's spread too wide. You don't even have to hear it, but you can hear it by looking at it. And so maybe you need to round out that vowel or make it taller, depending on the vowel. So how do you do your vowels? Did you know we can see them? And then my favorite problem that everyone comes to me, and they have this wonderful, I have to go to head voice to chest voice. Oh, but that's my break. I've got this wonderful break when I go from my head voice to my chest voice. What do I do with that? Well, vocal exercises are going to be your help. They're going to be your best friend if you have to deal with a break. When the voice is balanced and has a lot of all these different qualities that we want to make it flexible, we want it to have shimmer. Sometimes we talk about spike and velvet, and we want to have this wonderful shimmer to that voice. It has sparkle and ping and shimmer. But also we want to add to that, we want to have the richness of this gorgeous black velvet, the richness, the depth, and the warmth that adds to the voice. So we can have all of this. It's yours. Vocal exercises are the stepping stones that help us explore and discover and develop our voices they're more flexible, and there's more agility, there's a greater range to them, there's more clarity, and it enables us to use our voices in ways we probably never thought possible. Because I've had students that have said, I can't sing that high, but yet, guess what? They did. And it's been said, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that really carries a lot of truth when it comes to your voice. If you don't walk, pretty soon you're not going to be able to walk. Well, if you don't use your voice and you don't sing, you probably aren't going to be singing really a long time either. So vocalize, hum, bubble, whatever you do, sing. It's fun, and the sky is the limit. It's your voice and it's your choice. So happy vocalizing.